Today's talk features Professor John Borgonovo, direct to us from University College Cork, on the Friends of Irish Freedom in San Francisco, 1917 to 22. The Irish Revolution of 1916 to 23 featured a dynamic international dimension, particularly in the United States, particularly in San Francisco. To secure financial and diplomatic support, the Irish Republican campaign mobilized the Irish-American Diaspora. The San Francisco Bay Area emerged as a key location for this effort, as it generated lucrative fundraising, spectacular receptions of Irish emissaries, and a robust organization of 35,000 Californians, 16,000 in San Francisco alone, organized into 174 branches statewide. This lecture will outline the Irish independence movement in the Bay Area, explain and contextualize its efforts, and map areas of strength in San Francisco and across the state. It will hope to raise awareness of a remarkable campaign of international solidarity, which was embraced in San Francisco and elsewhere over a century ago. Dr. John Borgonovo is senior lecturer in the School of History at University College Cork. He has published extensively on revolutionary Ireland, including numerous monographs and the co-edited, award-winning Atlas of the Irish Revolution from Cork University Press. He appears frequently on radio and television, and in 23 was named University Historian by University College Cork. John, of course, is a native San Franciscan and a graduate of Sacred Heart High School, of course, who relocated to Cork in 2006. Welcome, John. I turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Tony, and thanks to the Society for having me. I also want to thank Elizabeth Creeley at the Irish Consulate in San Francisco. I had a great conversation with her when I was home in December, and that helped me, kind of directed me towards in some good directions. And it's always good to speak in front of folks from my hometown. And as Tony mentioned, my academic specialty is revolutionary Ireland, but I've always been interested in San Francisco history as well. And I think this is a good merger of those two interests to interact. And this paper really came about during my sabbatical last year when I nosed around Bancroft Library at Cal, and I found this great collection relating to Father Peter York and his time as head of California's Friend for Irish Freedom, and then the ensuing American Association for the Recognition of the Irish Republic. And what really excited me were these branch membership lists, which I have to adjust my figures. In San Francisco, there were 65 branches and 24,000 members. And I'll talk a bit more about those later. And it's this kind of really fascinating moment in not just in San Francisco history and Irish, but also in Irish-American history. And also as a native, I was really kind of drawn towards mapping all these different scenes of just kind of revolutionary activity across the city. And I'm also going to try to offer a bit of a snapshot of the California Irish communities involved, which are intriguing, and then contextualize the mobilization, explain a few of its high points, and particularly relating to the visiting dignitaries from Ireland. And then I'll talk a little bit about the local membership. So I want to begin with a health warning. This is very much a work in progress. It's kind of I'm at an early stage of a broader study of Irish-American support for the Irish-American independence movement in the West, the American West, during the period. And I also want to point you towards the work of a number of historians who have undertaken major research on the project. They include that great historian of the California Irish, Jim Walsh, emeritus professor at San Jose State, a fellow graduate of my alma mater, Sacred Heart High School. And I can point you to one of his students, Joanne Mooney Eichacker, who did a great study of Irish women tours during this period across the United States. More recently, the Irish historian Michael Dorley's undertaken a study of the Friends of Irish Freedom and also a biography of its leader, Judge Daniel Cahalan. And at UC Santa Cruz, Professor David Brundridge has written extensively on different aspects of American engagement with the Irish independence movement in the 19th and 20th centuries. And then there's also Francis Carroll at the University of Manitoba, and the late Jim Sarba of Gonzaga University, who wrote specifically about this mobilization in the American West. And then finally, because of time constraints, I can't really get into the Hindu conspiracy trial of 1917 to 18 in San Francisco, which featured a planned anti-British rebellion by Indian nationalists, assisted by Irish revolutionaries in 1917, 1918, gun running from San Francisco and San Diego, planned gun running, Imperial German diplomatic espionage at the consulate in the city, and then kind of culminating in a bloody shootout in the San Francisco federal courtroom that left 2 of the Indian defendants dead. So a lot of action there, but I'm not going to be able to get into it. I'd point you towards Matthew Plowman, who's written a fair bit about that. But anyway, I'll proceed. So the Irish were kind of a visible and prominent ethnic population in California during the second half of the 19th century, particularly here in San Francisco. Ireland had sent a massive wave of immigrants to the U.S. during its cataclysmic Great Famine, and from 1849 to 1853, which opened the door to future waves of Irish immigrants, particularly poor Catholic men and women. And those waves continued through the early 20th century. Now, I don't have firm figures for the Irish immigrant population in San Francisco, but I can say that by the turn of the century, there was an elaborate Hibernian cultural infrastructure here, with distinct Irish fraternal societies, language and dance classes, Gaelic sports teams, political factions, and various cultural groups. Unlike the East Coast cities, there was no real native Protestant financial and political establishment when the Irish Catholics arrived, so there were fewer barriers to upward mobility. And you see something similar in Montana, and its kind of mining economy there to what you get in California. So by that population was firmly entrenched by the turn of the century, but it wasn't a monolith. The Irish in California and San Francisco particularly crossed class and social barriers. They could be found among the financial elite, the top politicians and office holders within the city's robust trade union movement, and among San Francisco's extensive skilled and semi-skilled working classes. They arrived with high literacy rates and generally with English language skills, which helped them advance. They also possess cultural and social influence through their leadership in the Catholic Church in California, which included extensive parochial schools, high schools, and hospitals. Priests and members of religious orders in California were often Irish-born, and they brought with them elements of their politics and their culture. And this was important, particularly important in a city like San Francisco, which was very much a majority Catholic city at a time of anti-Catholicism across the United and certain elements of the United States. So these first and second generation Irish Americans supported Irish nationalism, including its more militant manifestation of Irish separatism. So in Ireland, we would call those people who desire an independent Irish state as separatists or Republicans. In the United States, there was very strong Irish American support for Irish republicanism, particularly since the time of the American Civil War. Its more extreme elements operated a national secret society called Clan na Gael. In San Francisco, their base was probably the Knights of the Red Branch Hall, KRB, on Mission and 7th Street. There were almost certainly other Klan branches in the state, but I don't have the details, because remember, the first rule of the secret society is don't talk about the secret society. So by the time of the First World War, Irish politics were undergoing a radical shift, and that followed similar patterns in Europe. At this time, Ireland was part of the United Kingdom and enjoyed limited democratic representation in the British legislature. However, continued efforts by moderate Irish nationalists to secure governmental autonomy, known as Home Rule, had failed for generations, despite widespread popular support. Those failed efforts ultimately created opportunity for the small Republican separatist movement, which took advantage of new political and social conditions brought about by the First World War to advance their agenda. In 1916, Republicans staged an armed insurrection in Dublin called the Easter Rising. It was easily suppressed by the British Army, which put Ireland under martial law and executed a number of the rebel leaders. And this helped swing public opinion towards the separatists and their political party called Sinn Féin. By that time, the United States had declared war on Germany and entered the First World War as an ally to Great Britain. An important consideration here from the American perspective is that the Irish Republicans had planned their Easter Rising with assistance from, quote, their gallant ally, Imperial Germany, in 1916. In 1918, the Sinn Féin party organized a successful civil disobedience campaign to prevent the introduction of conscription into the British Army in Ireland. So in the United States, there was suspicion of Irish Republicans as being pro-Germans, which was not unreasonable. And at a minimum, the Irish were perceived rightfully as trying to turn the American public away from their wartime ally, Great Britain. So what about San Francisco and California? Now, back in 1916, it was anticipated that the end of the First World War would bring about an international peace conference to redraw European borders. And there was a growing expectation that President Woodrow Wilson's calls for self-determination for colonized people would include Ireland. Irish-American supporters of Irish independence thereby organized a national movement to advocate for Irish self-determination, and that was called the Friends of Irish Freedom. The organization leadership was dominated by Clan na Gael conspirators operating out of New York City, and they established branches across the United States. Memberships in the organization spiked following the Easter Rising, which galvanized Irish nationalists in the United States, as it had in Ireland. In San Francisco, this is when you start seeing the first mass meetings and fundraising, particularly in relation to support for political prisoners in Ireland. The California Friends of Irish Freedom, state chairman was Father Peter York from San Francisco. The Galway-born Catholic priest was a known firebrand for Catholic, Irish, and labor causes, both in the city and nationally. Operating his own newspaper, he also had his own created a citadel among the working class Irish community in St. Peter's Parish in the heart of the Mission District. Father York was a superb propagandist and organizer, but he often fell out with collaborators and carried many of the prejudices of Irish Americans at the time. And if you want to read more about Father York, I would direct you towards Jim Walsh's work. By 1917, the Friends of Irish Freedom claimed 40,000 members in California, although I think that's probably too high. They held a statewide convention at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco. When we look at the state executive, the geographic spread should be of the liking of this audience. Of 18 members, 1 came from Stockton, 1 from Oakland, 1 from San Jose, 3 from Los Angeles, and 12 from San Francisco. So 2/3 came from the city. In terms of gender, there were 14 men and 5 women. And women were kind of a feature of a lot of this Irish-American mobilization, although they weren't necessarily in the senior leadership. They were more kind of workers in a lot of these branches and statewide bodies. There were also 4 priests on the executive, including Father York. So that's a bit more problematic. Beyond the very real anti-Catholic sentiments in the United States, Irish separatists at this time were also trying to convince an international audience that their struggle was against the British government, rather than with Protestant people in the province of Ulster, which now kind of encompasses Northern Ireland. So by giving this Irish-American movement such visibly Catholic faces, it was kind of counterproductive because it identified this mobilization as being Catholic rather than being kind of nonpartisan Irish. Things took a dangerous turn for the Irish Americans in April 1917 when the US government declared war on the Central Powers. That declaration produced strong anti-German prejudice, riots, and vandalism directed towards German Americans. So for the Friends of Irish Freedom, who had previously opposed American participation in the war, they were obviously vulnerable in a growing atmosphere of hyper-patriotism and xenophobia. In response, Father York organized a mass meeting in Dreamland Hall, nominally to commemorate the first anniversary of the Easter Rising. All Bay Area Irish societies attended the packed rally, during which speakers pledged, quote, their undivided loyalty to the United States and to take steps to support the government in the war. So they're repudiating any opposition to the war and announcing themselves as Americans first. And that fear of dual loyalty by ethnic Americans is a persistent theme throughout this Irish-American mobilization. And then from here on out, with the Friends of Irish Freedom and subsequent meetings, there's always a very obvious American patriotic visible element. There are American flags, the singing of the national anthem, stars and stripes, bunting, honor guards of uniformed Irish-American war veterans, images of George Washington or Ben Franklin, and then individual Friends branches took on the names of prominent Irish-American revolutionary heroes like Commodore Barry, Patrick Henry, and Nathan Hale. Despite these efforts, Irish Americans face scorn from some prominent national leaders as hyphenated Americans rather than 100% Americans who are advancing Irish interests rather than American interests. Their critics included former President Theodore Roosevelt, the general of the U.S. Army, Black Jack Pershing, and the head of the U.S. Navy forces in Europe, Admiral William Sims, who called the Irish-American lobby, quote, disloyal zebras who behave like jackasses. While the American support for Irish separatism would seem uncontroversial to us today, at that time it brought with it a degree of risk, particularly in areas beyond the large Irish-American ethnic enclaves like San Francisco. So Irish Republicans sent 3 major emissaries on speaking tours in the United States from 1917 to 1921. The first was Hannah Sheehy Skeffington. She was a bourgeois radical, a graduate of University College Dublin, a militant suffragist, and a newspaper editor who had been jailed and force-fed while on hunger strike in 1914. During the Easter Rising, her husband Frank was shot out of hand by a British Army officer, which aroused great public protest in Ireland. So that gave her particular prominence. Hannah Sheehy Skeffington embarked on a speaking tour across the United States in January 1917, advocating for Irish independence. And just in terms of her politics, she was quite comfortable with the kind of the more radical politics. She was accompanied by her 7-year-old son, Owen, who she enrolled in a Montessori boarding school in Santa Barbara, which was run by the millionaire socialist, pacifist, and psychological theorist, Prince Hopkins. So that should give you an idea of her openness towards new ideas. Her time in San Francisco included a number of appearances. She stayed at the Palace Hotel on Market Street, gave a sold-out lecture to 1,000 people at the Knights of Columbus Hall on Golden Gate between Jones and Leavenworth, and another at the Sacred Heart Church Hall in Oakland on 40th and ML King Boulevard. She delivered 2 separate addresses at the Dreamland Rink, which was an all-purpose auditorium on Steiner between Post and Stutter. She sold at the Dreamland twice, which had a capacity of 8,000 people. And on one occasion, they had to turn 1,000 people away from the doors. So very big crowds. And old timers like myself will remember the Dreamland as the site for the Grateful Dead, televised New Year's Eve shows, and for me, the home of the Ice Capades. So there you go. The controversy of her San Francisco visit, this first visit, was a rescinded invitation for her to address a St. Francis Hotel luncheon hosted by the San Francisco Center of the California Civic League. Now, the Civic League was a precursor to the League of Women Voters of San Francisco, of League of Women Voters, national organization, and it was a women's suffrage organization. The previous evening, Skeffington had denounced Great Britain, which sparked protests from the Civic League. And even though Hannah Sheehy Skeffington was Ireland's most prominent women's suffrage activists, the Civic League objected to her on the basis that they were members, quote, of a patriotic society. So you see these kind of divisions over the Irish and their wartime stance. Hannah She Skeffington further associated with anti-war labor radicals, and that caused serious troubles on her return trip in April 1918. I'll just say really quickly also, she spoke, you see the statewide locations. So she spoke in Oakland, San Francisco, also in Vallejo and Stockton and Los Angeles. So a lot of these folks are moving across to different locations as well. So on her return visit in April the next year, this is what I think happened because the chronology is a bit jumbled. On the 16th of April, she was invited to speak at a labor rally at the Civic Auditorium, which is now the Bill Graham down at the Civic Center. And the rally was in support of the reprieve or clemency for Tom Mooney. So Mooney was a labor radical, or just a radical, and he'd been wrongfully convicted for the San Francisco Preparedness Day bombing on Market Street in 1916, which killed 10 and wounded 40 people. Mooney was slated for execution, and that triggered intense national protests and strike actions by organized labor. And as I said, Mooney was found later to have been innocent, and that was widely known at the time. Mooney's supporters included much of radical San Francisco, and as well as anarchists and anti-war activists. So Hannah here put herself alongside what would be considered by establishment folks to be a subversive element at a time when she was also speaking against America's wartime ally, Great Britain. The next day, she addressed 6,000 people at Dreamland, but she went up to Sacramento for a meeting, and that was shut down by the chief of police there. And then on her return to San Francisco, she was scheduled to speak at the Scottish Rite Auditorium, which I would remember as the Regency One Theater and Van Ness and Sutter. But the auditorium was shut down by federal agents on the grounds of potential subversion against the United States. Undeterred, Hannah moved her meeting to the Knights of the Red Branch Hall on Mission Street. However, federal government agents and San Francisco police broke up the meeting and arrested Hannah and its chairman amid protests and booing. She was held in jail overnight, but the charges were dropped after she threatened to go on hunger strike. And that should give you a measure of the woman. 4 nights later, she again tried to address Dreamland Rink, but it was shut down amidst kind of official pressure on the owners. And she stood outside the door of the venue and redirected the crowd to the Knights of the Red Branch Auditorium, where she addressed them. So she's getting a lot of official pressure and kind of being repressed to a certain extent. And this was probably the worst possible scenario for the Irish Republicans. At this time, they were trying to convince international public opinion that they were respectable and orderly Democrats rather than wild-eyed revolutionaries and Bolsheviks threatening the global order. Yet Skeffington's alignment with San Francisco radicals put this broader Irish movement at risk, or at least that was the fear. And so from here on out, you're going to see much more carefully controlled tours. So the following year, we get an even more prominent Irish Republican, Eamon de Valera, who we often call Dev over here. So de Valera was born in New York City to an Irish domestic servant who married a Spanish sculptor, who then left the family and died of consumption. Young Dev was sent back to work in Ireland, near Limerick, and raised by his grandparents, who were rather poor farm laborers. Dev was highly intelligent and driven. Great student. He secured scholarships and eventually graduated from the Royal University. He subsequently taught mathematics in Irish teacher colleges and became active in the Gaelic League, which was often a pathway to republicanism. He commanded one of the main rebel garrisons during the 1916 Rising and narrowly escaped execution. Upon his release from prison, he became the primary leader of the Sinn Féin political party, which swept the 1918 general election. In January 1919, those Sinn Féin members elected to the British House of Commons gathered in Dublin, declared Ireland an independent republic, and formed their own legislature called Dáil Éireann. which was then declared an illegal organization by the British authorities. Those members elected De Valera as the president of Dáil Éireann, but in the United States, he was usually referred to as president of the Irish Republic. At that stage, Dev was imprisoned in Lincoln Jail in England, but spectacularly, he escaped from there, stowed away on a ship, and arrived in New York City to great fanfare and public celebrations. He then embarked on a 60-city tour of the United States. I'll just mention that De Valera was the most influential political figure in independent Ireland. He served as Taoiseach, or prime minister, from 1932 to 48, and two more terms in the 1950s. He wrote the 1937 Constitution and was chairman of the League of Nations in 1938. So he's a major figure. The goals of Dev's America tour were to seek U.S. government diplomatic recognition of Ireland's self-declared republic, to energize American support for the Irish independence movement, and to raise funds for Dáil Éireann's underground government. And that last element was by far the most successful. So San Francisco was a high priority for Dev's tour, as it offered access to a large Irish-American population, wealthy donors, and major political figures like U.S. Senator James D. Phelan and other members of the California congressional delegation. The Irish Republicans also wanted Dev's reception in the Bay Area to generate international press coverage, which it did. So he arrived in San Francisco. Sorry, I might have another slide here. He spent 4 days in San Francisco in July 1919, brought with him a small touring party of male and female secretaries and organizers who were all from Ireland. On the ground, the tour plugged into the Friends of Irish Freedom organization. Dev arrived by train at the Ferry Building, where he was met by about 10,000 supporters. And Jim Walsh has written that Dev was picked up by an automobile, but members of the crowd attached big, massive ropes onto the car bumper and then dragged it up Market Street in a spontaneous street parade all the way to the St. Francis Hotel at Union Square, where he was staying. And this was a common tribute in Irish political street demonstrations, whereby supporters effectively stepped into the harness to pull a visiting dignitary in a carriage or wagon through the city streets. So it was an Irish kind of callback. That night, De Valera joined a banquet dinner at the Palace Hotel for men and women of counties Clare and Mayo. The next day, he toured the Bethlehem Steelworks shipyard in San Francisco's Dogpatch, where he addressed 8,000 workers. He then proceeded to the Civic Auditorium in the city center, where he spoke to a rally of 12,000 supporters. The third day, he visited St. Ignatius University, which is now University of San Francisco, which awarded him a doctorate, honorary doctorate. That event was held at the Young Women's Institute at 50 Oak Street, which I think now is the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. So the San Francisco visit was very deliberately organized to resemble like a visiting head of state. So that same day, Dev toured the Relief Home, which is now known as Laguna Honda. He then proceeded to the Little Sisters of the Poor Home for the Aged on 4th and Lake Street, where he conversed in Irish language with some elderly Irish immigrants who were there. And then from there, he went into the Presidio and visited wounded American soldiers at Letterman Hospital. And that was another of these deliberate efforts to demonstrate the Irish Republican status as friends of patriotic Americans. And that night, he addressed a mass meeting of 4,000 members of the Ancient Order of Hibernians at the Civic Auditorium. And then the final day was the big one. It was a Sunday. It opened with Mass at St. Peter's Catholic Church in the Mission, Father York's parish. Then Dev was taken to Golden Gate Park at the Bandshell to dedicate the Robert Emmet statue in front of the Academy of Sciences, which was donated by Senator Phelan and is still there, although its location has moved. The dedication ceremony drew an immense crowd estimated at between 60 and 80,000 people. So pretty much all of Irish San Francisco. From there, Dev motored over the bridge to Shell Mound Park in Emeryville, which was then a picnic area. He addressed 20,000 people attending an Irish festival of 60 Irish societies from across the Bay Area. And then from there, he went to address a mass meeting at the Oakland Auditorium, now the Kaiser Convention Center, and that drew a crowd of 12,000. So you're talking about a couple 100,000 people he addresses or sees in the course of a couple of days. All these events were front page news stories in the Bay Area and statewide. There was a coverage in the California's ethnic press, including the Italian and Spanish language dailies. But then also international press stories occurred around the world about the San Francisco reception. So this was a big success. Later that year, Dev made a return stop while conducting a whistle-stop tour of the United States. But this occurred at a time of growing kind of hyper-nationalism amidst the first Red Scare, as American anti-immigrant and anti-communist forces had something of a moral panic about possible Red Revolution in the United States. The patriotic veterans group, the American Legion, was very much at the fore of this 100% Americanism campaign, which tried to kind of shut down ethnic American identities and political efforts, such as those advocated by the Friends of Irish Freedom. And this played out in a couple of ways. When De Valera visited Portland, Oregon, a group of American Legion veterans attacked his automobile and ripped off the Irish tricolor because it flew alongside the Stars and Stripes. And they considered that an insult to the national flag. The mayor of Portland, who was later quite sympathetic to the Ku Klux Klan, banned the Irish tricolor from being displayed in that city, including at a mass rally that night in downtown Portland. So De Valera comes to San Francisco the next day. The San Francisco branch of the American Legion protested any flying of the tricolor during his Bay Area visit. When Dev arrived in Oakland the next day, he conducted an automobile tour of downtown Oakland, and his car was festooned with Irish tricolors. But the solution was he put two big Irish-American war veterans in uniform flying, who were holding American flags on both sides of his running board as both a bodyguard and kind of, flying the Stars and Stripes. But again, it shows that there was very much an awareness of trying to offset any sense that they could be perceived as anti-American. Dev spoke at another sold-out Civic Center rally, Civic Auditorium, and he also spent a lot of his time organizing financial networks to sell these Republican bonds, and I'll talk about that right now. So California was really important. I'm going to come back here in all kinds of different fundraising for the Irish Republicans, and there were all these different funds throughout the movement. They were for things like the Irish Republican bonds were to support the Dáil Éireann government. There were funds for the upkeep of political prisoners, financial assistance for the victims of British state violence, election funds, and these were typically raised. So different funds were raised at different times, and California was important in terms of this kind of gathering of monies for the Irish cause. So I broke down a few of these by head of population. This is one, the Irish Relief Fund. So you can see from Western states. So I got the total, and then I factored in the population of the state. So California is and Wyoming and Montana kind of break out in terms of the Western states, which are 9 cents per head of population. And considering the relatively small or the limited numbers of Irish in California, it's a pretty significant amount. And I'll just point out that it's basically Washington State is 3 cents, Texas isn't even a penny, so it's significantly outdistancing a lot of the other states. And then when you look nationally, California is still fairly high. And this is it's not quite as high as those industrial New England industrial states like Rhode Island topping out and Connecticut, but it's still pretty significantly higher, just below New York State. So it shows kind of the level of this kind of fundraising. Okay, so the fundraising allowed the Republicans to finance different aspects of their independence campaign. It also galvanized Irish-American supporters who were an important political constituency in the United States, and it provided a platform to frame the Irish struggle as a war of national defense against British oppression and militarism. And I'm getting close, getting near the end here. And this last element is important because in 1920 and 21, there was what we call the Irish War of Independence, which was about a 1.5 year long guerrilla campaign against British government forces. And a feature of that was that the British government responded to IRA guerrilla attacks with reprisals directed towards both Republican supporters and the broader population. And that collective punishment was documented by Irish Republicans and then broadcast around the world via the Irish diaspora. And San Francisco was really a key hub of that North American Irish propaganda network. It had printing presses, it had widespread distribution, and a lot of this material was packaged and distributed from San Francisco. So, and a lot of this effort came in, we can see some of this effort. I'm gonna come back here, come back to this in a second. So a lot of this kind of culminates with the visit of Mary McSweeney in 1921. So she's the last of the emissaries. She rose to prominence during the hunger strike of her brother, Terence McSweeney, the Cork Lord Mayor and IRA commander, who died on hunger strike in London in November 1920. And that hunger strike attracted intense worldwide interest and fascination, and was one of the globe's biggest news stories of 1920. Mary McSweeney was an important activist in her own right. She was an active campaigner for women's suffrage and Irish independence for over 2 decades. She was highly intelligent. She held a BA from my home institution at the University College Cork and a teaching qualification from Cambridge University. She opened her own school, her own girls' school in Cork, which was considered highly advanced and successful, kind of based on a performing arts model. She was a national leader of the Republican Women's Organization, Come On, which involved both political and paramilitary activity. In 1921, she was elected to Parliament, representing the Cork constituency, to Dáil Éireann, and she was one of Europe's most visible political leaders at the time. And she's probably also the Irish independent movement's best public speaker. She was charismatic, clever in her messaging, and could think on her feet. And her tour of the United States in 1921 was highly successful. So she also personified this British reprisal campaign. Her brother's best friend and predecessor, Tomás McCurtain, had been assassinated by police in Cork in 1920. And her home city was the site of the most notorious British reprisal of the war, when British police, known as Black and Tans, burned down 60 shops in the Cork city center, as well as its city hall and its Carnegie Public Library. And fundraising for that burning became a kind of major focus of American fundraising. So her visit to California was not without controversy. She was invited to address the California State Senate in Sacramento, but that was short-circuited by a surprise vote, which abruptly adjourned the chamber before her speech, forcing her to give remarks off the official record. And that was probably the result of a federation of Sacramento Protestant churches that denounced her appearance and called Irish Republicans disloyal to the American cause. And I want to emphasize that these kind of counter-protests were quite common experiences for the Irish delegations throughout their visits. They weren't as common in California, but you still had some remarkable scenes, such as Eamon de Valera's visit to Los Angeles in 1919, when the LA Times denounced him as a Bolshevik, and his rally at the Shriners Theater was shut down hours before its scheduled start. However, the reception was different in the Bay Area, where the Irish community carried significant political, culture, and economic weight. This was particularly important because of the relatively pro-Irish attitudes of local judiciary and law enforcement officials. So Mary McSweeney, arrived in San Francisco with another outburst of wildly cheering crowds of several thousand. They paraded her up ferry buildings in Market Street, with supporters tossing floral bouquets at her feet along Market. War veterans in uniform processed her all the way to the Fairmont Hotel, where she stayed. And during remarks in the city, she appeared at the Civic Auditorium, and that drew 15,000 people. She advocated that the Irish Americans should consider themselves patriotic Americans, and that it was in America's tradition of liberty to support countries seeking their national liberation, such as Ireland. So she deliberately linked Ireland's cause to America's revolutionary past. The San Francisco newspapers called her the Irish Joan of Arc and reported, quote, "Tears and cheers. These have been San Francisco's tribute to Miss Mary McSweeney wherever she has appeared, wherever she has spoken," because she made a great impression. And she also brought with her a sense of urgency for American support of Ireland. She described in excessive detail the brutality of the British counterinsurgency campaign and demanded her audiences take action. So, and this kind of takes me to my last bit of the talk here. I'll just mention at the end of 1920, the Friends of Irish Freedom, in the best Irish tradition, split. And it was replaced by a new organization now directly controlled by Irish Republicans called the American Association for the Recognition of the Irish Republic. In California, pretty much every Friends of Irish Freedom branch joined the new American Association en masse. And the new American Association becomes even more active, and membership jumped across California. Operating from its downtown headquarters at 504 Grant Street, the association formed basically a hub for Irish pamphlets, news sheets, fundraising circulars, and public appeals, which helped recruit new supporters and financial backers. And that's going to lead me to this final part of the talk, which is the membership data for California. So when I saw this last year in Bancroft Library, I was really impressed. And I'll give you a breakdown of some of these figures. So these are partial figures from the main statewide councils. So for Los Angeles County, there were 27 branches, 2,650 members. Sacramento, Yolo, and Sutter counties had 9 branches, 1,258 members. Fresno, Merced, Madera counties had 4 branches and 400 members. Alameda and Contra Costa counties, 24 branches, 4,600 members. And San Francisco, 66 branches and 24,000 members. So in terms of individual branches besides San Francisco, LA City has 17 branches, Oakland has 9, Sacramento 5. And I think my favorite statewide one is Calexico, which had its own branch. So throwing it out there, giving a shout out to Calexico. So for the Bay Area, you have branches in the East Bay, Alameda, Berkeley, Fruitvale, Piedmont, Pinole, Crockett, Port Costa, Richmond, Cupertino, San Leandro, Vallejo, Modesto, Pinole, and Livermore. Down the peninsula, you had branches in Colma, South City, San Bruno, Burlingame, San Mateo, Menlo Park, San Jose, Santa Cruz, and San Juan Bautista. Up in the North Bay, you got Santa Rosa, Guerneville, Cotati, Napa, Petaluma, Sebastopol, San Rafael, and San Anselmo. So I'm going to dig into the San Francisco branches just to give you a sense of the scale I've been describing. So there are different kinds of Irish fraternal groups, like the Ancient Order Hibernians, the Gaelic League, and like the Rebel Cork and County Clare Association. They have their own branches. But then there are also vocational branches like the Nurses Branch, the Streetcar Men have their own branch, the Newspaper Writers, and the American War Veterans. There's also a branch organized by students of St. Rose Academy. So God love them and the Dominicans. But a majority of the branches were Catholic parish branches. And for those of you who may not be familiar with these locations, I'll try to add a street or neighborhood. And I'm just going to give you a sense of a few of these. So my home parish of St. Vincent de Paul in Cow Hollow had 203 members. Our Van Ness Street neighbors at St. Bridget's had 267. On Gary Street, Jim Walsh's St. Monica's Parish and the Richmond had 356. In the inner Sunset on Irving Street, St. Anne's came in at 461 members. On the Western Addition, St. Dominic's had 361 members. In Sacred Heart Parish on Oak Street, 506. In the Haight, St. Agnes had 837 members. In Noe Valley, St. Paul's had 544, and St. Philip's 741. And St. Peter's came in at 1,265 members. So it's a remarkable kind of mass movement in San Francisco. About 24,000 out of a population of are about 500,000. So just under 5% of the city population. And branches were involved in all kinds of different activities, from fundraising to letter writing to politicians to attendance at rallies and demonstrations. And the movement must pretty much have swept up everybody in the city who claimed to be of Irish extraction. And I suspect there were a significant other of ethnicities involved here, which I want to explore. So the organization peaked in the middle of 1921 at the height of the Irish War of Independence, when British Army conduct in Ireland was very much an international topic of discussion. However, and I think that really led this engagement. However, when the Anglo-Irish conflict ended in late 1921, the American Association rapidly declined. Now, this occurred even though there was a civil war fought in Ireland over the peace treaty with Britain, which partitioned the state of the island of Ireland, and it created an Irish Free State with limited independence within the British Empire. While the American Association nationally and in California supported the anti-treaty or Republican forces, much of their membership dropped out of the movement. They had difficulty understanding why good Irish people were fighting themselves instead of the British. The Civil War lasted a year, and it ended with defeat of the Republican forces. And the American Association continued, but as a much more modest kind of rump organization before it too faded into organization. So just to conclude, the Friends of Irish Freedom and the American Association for the Recognition of the Irish Republic were important mass movements in the state of California from 1917 and 1921, with the mobilization in San Francisco as intense as any single ethnic issue in city history. The reception of Irish Republican emissaries which occurred here, were closely followed not just in the United States, but around the world. They invigorated the Irish independence movement at home and embarrassed the British government abroad. But this is not just a story of Irish California or the San Francisco Irish. The events here touch on all kinds of different issues relevant to American history and the history of the American West in this period, including the first Red Scare, hyperpatriotism, Catholic political power, immigration, assimilation, xenophobia, anti-imperialism, and feminism. And I hope to explore some of those matters in the future. And when I do, I will report back to you. So thanks very much. And there you go.
Thank you very much, John. That was fascinating. And I want to hear more. You know, each of these slides suggests so much more exploration of this topic. I'm wanting to see if anybody has any questions.
Say yes.
Yes, I have a couple of questions.
Wonderful, please.
Okay, my name is Cecilia Fabush Becker, and in 2016, I did the research for the Irish in Northern California. California in the Rising, but it focused because it was being co-sponsored by San Jose Dublin. It also focused on the San Jose area as well as San Francisco. And I delved into both. And first of all, my question is, are you aware of the John Byrne collection of the records of the Friends of Irish Freedom at San Jose State University in the special collections?
I'm aware of them, but I have not reviewed them, but I will review them. And I'm aware of San Jose State's kind of holdings in all this area. I also know there's another set of collections in Gleason Library at USF as well. So I'll be paying those. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing is are you aware of John McEnery and his father and the fact that his father was deliberately brought here by the Irish and as a journalist and became a editor and had a lot of influence in the local papers here and changed their orientation, so to speak, regarding Ireland and the Irish-American community. And Big John himself was the head of the Democratic Party in California. And he was a member of the AOH. In fact, we also found that the mining had a very big influence. It puzzled people when we were talking to them as to how it was that San Jose, only about one-tenth the size of San Francisco, seemed to contribute so much in terms of money. And people forgot two things. Gold at the time needed another element to refine it with. It was called mercury. The biggest mercury mines in the world were down in Almaden, and guess who were the miners were? There were a lot of people who were disgruntled with the English. There were Cornish, Spanish, Irish, and a lot. And then there were, of course, all the businesses that fed into those coming and going. And Senator Phelan, when he founded his banks, the second bank he founded was in San Jose.
And his big estate is here.
And his big estate is in Montalvo. So I would hope you would look into that a little more, because what I found is that while the demonstrations and rallies and such were very important for drawing attention, there was a lot more that went on behind the scenes, especially with a lot of crossover membership of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, particularly in this area and in Oakland and a little bit in LA, with the Friends of Irish Freedom. John Byrne names in all that communications. You'll find a number of them. I went and looked them up, and I also looked up the microfilms of a number of newspapers, including the Mercury News and a competitor for it, and so forth. And it was amazing how many of the same names were showing up at both the Friends of Irish Freedom events and the AOH events. There was definitely strong links.
Wrap it up.
The last thing is look up Michael Griffin. He was the treasurer for the AOH and the secretary at the time when money was being raised just before the Rising. He later became a Democratic Party official and was made the head of the new Kings Canyon Sequoia State Park.
He ran the park.
He ran the park. And I'll tell you, there was a very odd thing that connected to him. First of all, his father and his father's brother were among the Irish who made it rich in the gold rush, actually struck gold. This is what enabled him to be sent to the University of Santa Clara. And the University of Santa Clara was closely allied with St. Ignatius in San Francisco. This shows up in a number of articles, and a little bit in the literature and the materials that John Burns had accumulated. And there is something that happened that is very weird. The people who were in the AOH, who were also in the Friends of Irish Freedom, who seemed to be connected to them, all had their graves destroyed. If you go to the two cemeteries, which include the Mission Santa Clara one, the annex where Micmac is buried, Mick McDonald, the assassins, you will find that there's two rows of graves that were literally mowed down. Nobody knows how it happened, but they almost all had Irish-American leaders in them, who were leaders of the AOH and in the Friends of Irish Freedom. Michael Griffin's grave has also been destroyed. It's at the, Sacred Heart Cemetery by Alum Rock Avenue in San Jose. A whole row, again, his entire family's graves were destroyed.
Okay, well that's a very interesting contribution to, I think, this time and place. Thank you.
The only thing I'll say is that what I find is that all these different, yes, San Francisco is its own thing. It has all these different groups and overlaps and what have you. San Jose, yeah, absolutely. It has every Irish community is different. There are a lot of connections, but they're all kind of different. Oakland and the East Bay obviously has something pretty intense going on there. And again, you basically have to dig into local personalities and figure out kind of biographies and figure out how these people connect. And it's only until that. And what I always tell people over here is that, Irish America, folks here always think about it's Boston and New York, but it's like every Irish American community is totally different. Yeah. What San Francisco or California has, and I've done a little bit of work on Montana. Montana also, the mining really opens up economic opportunities. And so here, the California Irish have a lot of access to some serious money, serious financial resources, and that also makes it attractive. But each of these networks is quite distinct to the place, but you really got to dig in. So thanks. I'll definitely take a look at those papers as well.
Any other questions?
One last thing.
Let's move on to another speaker here. Any other questions? Any other questions here?
Can I offer one, Tony?
Jim, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, John and Ms. Becker, too, for these presentations. What struck me, John, is the magnitude of support for all of this, which you've developed here. Having gone over some of this ground, a portion of it previously, I was never struck by how universal and comprehensive this support was. You've certainly done that. Of course, modern scholarship is always better than what we did so long ago. You seem to be more insightful and more articulate. Thank you very much for your lovely presentation today. However, I wish to point out that this august society that you're addressing, you are the second presenter on this subject, not the first. Okay, the first on this subject took place almost or exactly 50 years ago. And here's a picture of that evening before the Irish Literary and Historical Society of 1974. It took place at a community room in San Francisco when we used to have banks provide these for us. The two gentlemen in the center were members of these organizations that you described tonight, and we interviewed them. I'm on one corner. I'm the handsome guy with the dark black hair and glasses. And my late friend Mike Tammany on the far end was a jury commissioner in San Francisco. So we interviewed these two guys that were active in the work you've described. One was named Hannah, and the other was named Tahaney, if I'm not mistaken. Also, I've observed on the membership of tonight's, or those that are participating tonight, I see an awful lot of your relatives present. Okay, that's a very good trick for stacking the audience.
In the best Irish political tradition. You pack the meeting, Jim.
Yeah, and I want to point out to you that it's certainly not fresh and new. I found a picture also that same evening in which I'm able to pick out my father and mother. Yeah, my wife's father and mother, my wife, my brother, my sister-in-law, and our children in this crowd. And on other evenings, I can remember a trick that I'll pass on to Tony and the others, that when the attendance during the evening is sparse, my father used to always take off his overcoat and put it on one chair, put his hat on a second chair, and he would sit on the third chair, just to make it look like there were more people attending. Pardon me for this indulgence. It's exactly 50 years old, but you're doing it much, much better. Thank you, John.
No, my pleasure, Jim. And I hope you didn't mind my, I didn't mention when I mentioned St. Monica's, the impression that you guys felt because of the gym that was there in terms of its effect on your basketball jump shot with the low roof there. So that's always, there's always been a lot of citywide sympathy. But no, I think the other thing I'd say on that topic a little more seriously is, a lot of these, as you said, a lot of these fraternal groups are either still around or only recently defunct. And a lot of their records are going all the way back. And I encourage anybody who has access to any of those records to make sure that they're protected and make steps to get them into the safe hands of archives, whether that's down with you all down at San Jose State or at USF, or I know the Irish Cultural Center Library has a lot of collections as well. And a lot of this history, which seems quite recent for us, as you mentioned, Jim, like, you first were writing about this, in the 60s and 70s. But our memory, our connections to this living memory is stretching. So I'd encourage anybody who has those kind of records to protect them, so that we can delve into this and kind of in the detail it really deserves.
the San Francisco room of the City Library in San Francisco is useful too. They have collections. Thank you again, John. This has been wonderful.
We have a question from Pat. Hello, Pat.
Hi, can you hear me here? Thank you. That was fantastic, John. Just fantastic. You joined the over 100 speakers the Irish Forum had in the 1980s during the Troubles. And I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to mention Professor Dermot Keogh, our very good friend, obviously a colleague of yours as well, who was with the Irish Forum and as a speaker over here on several occasions. So congratulations. I look forward to seeing some of your work in print. We have an Irish Forum archives and you're going to be in there with it. Thank you very much again.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, I went to, when, people always ask me how I got interested in a lot of this. And I went to a few year events in the 80s, when I was in college and what have you, because those were always interesting. The other person I'd mentioned with Jim is his good first cousin, Tig Foley, who he's also written a bit about with Father York. And Tig, I don't know if Tig's on the call, but Tig's retired now at University
He
of
is
Galway.
on the call.
Oh, there you go, Tig. How you doing?
On mute.
Okay. Anyway, so thank you. Thanks, you guys.
Deborah, would you like to ask a question?
Well, I just wanted to thank you for the lecture today, because my grandfather was part of the uprising in County Tipperary, and he came over here in 1921, June of 1921, July of 1921, and he ended up in San Francisco. And so it was really interesting for me to hear this whole side of the story after growing up hearing the other stories and studying all of his involvement over there at that time. So thank you.
Great. I mean, I got some papers. One of the fascinating things I find is, my stuff is, Cork based, but a lot of people who I studied ended up in San Francisco, ended up in the Mission District or wherever. And there was a pretty healthy old IRA fraternal organization that used to do, I think they would go to St. Pat's downtown for Easter. And they had kind of their own Easter commemoration, but it was the old IRA all the way until the 70s. So they were kind of, I think, visible. I mean, some of you folks might remember them as kind of being a visible element in the Irish community until that generation kind of faded.
Yeah, my mom told us lots of stories about my grandfather in San Francisco during that time.
Carolyn.
Thanks. Hi, John. Thank you for the talk. I just have a super quick question. You mentioned the Protestant churches organizing against speakers in Sacramento, and then that Hannah Sheehy-Skeffington was scheduled into the Scottish Rite, and Deb was going to speak at the Shriners. I'm just wondering if you know anything about how that would have gone down.
One big church, one with the venues. You think about these venues. How often are you packing them? And how often? And so I think that they, you have a relationship. The thing with the fraternal organizations are that I don't like over here. Those the Freemasons halls, like no Catholics wouldn't have anything to do with them. I think there are so many fraternal associations in the United States like this. Like I don't think the Scottish Rite might not even be a Freemasons. It's like it might be its own offshoot. But you had like all these different. The Elks, all these different fraternal associations. And whenever you have these big halls, they're looking to fill them. Carolyn, I hope you appreciated the fact that St. Rose formed its own branch. So exactly. So
there's at least 3 of us on this talk right now, I can see.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Rebecca, Tracy. Rebecca, I'll ask you to unmute.
I'm unmuting. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it was pretty stunning presentation, packed, and thank you so much. The thing that strikes me is the archival aspect of it, that you're dealing with paper.
Reflects what our thing
And so much of what we now acquire and stockpile is online. And so 50 years from now, people trying to find out things about organizations like this one won't have as much, we'll have to find different kinds of resources. And I don't know what those will be. Maybe you could comment on more recent archival practice.
So sorry, I just had a security guard tell me to, because it's late here, but I'm okay. So in terms of, so yeah, so we're blessed with some of the digitization elements. So like stuff like I go into Bancroft, even just things like having a camera and being able to do all this stuff in in 2 hours or 3 hours instead of a week. Or, I know that when I first started doing research, or Jim or Tig, whatever, the idea of doing a newspaper is you go into a library and you get newsreels, you get microfilm, and you're taking your notes. And now we have all this stuff online. Like the California State, the digitized California newspaper archive is fantastic. It has the Mercury News, it has the San Francisco Call, and so you can supplement a lot of these with digital sources that you can kind of balance stuff out with. But a lot of the really good archival stuff, which hasn't been seen or hasn't been revisited in a long time, is in libraries, is in special collections, and just getting in and digging into that. And that's really part of the whole thing with all this stuff too, is it's actually only when you get a big box of material that you, through osmosis, are connecting to other events that you might not have realized are important, or you're making connections that you hadn't realized what was there. Actually seeing physically holding the stuff and physically seeing the other material next to it. I always find an archival visit much more fruitful than staring at a bloody screen all day. And what I also find with some of that stuff is that with some of the online material is it's narrowing people's research to a certain extent, because it's driving people doing that from their home. And what you really need is as many sources as possible. So it's helpful, but we've got to make sure it's not totally limiting either. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? John, I wanted to ask you one quick one. The rate of the spread of these organizations and the fact that so many people formed organizations, and there was such a diverse geographic spread, is almost makes one think of social media. Of course, that didn't exist. Is there any way to account for the speed and the sort of density of this spread?
Well, I mean, people read newspapers, and people read an insane amount of newspapers. Like if you think about how many newspapers there were, a lot of the newspapers had morning and evening editions. Mm-hmm. So all that was easy to do. Also, this kind of associational culture, a lot of it's related to the idea that you have designated leisure time. It's not a coincidence that those really huge De Valera events were on a Sunday, when you can get off time, and it's also not a coincidence that the big rallies were always at nighttime. And it's also kind of a thing to do. And the mobilization you're getting, it's going from different sources, the formal organization, but also the informal networks as well. One challenge for the Irish Republicans, though, is that a lot of this infrastructure in the Irish community is Catholic. It's Catholic parish halls. It's meeting people after mass. It's association. It's AOH is really, it's essentially Catholic. It's Knights of Columbus halls. All that kind of material. So, and priests are often seen by Irish as the most respectable people in their community. So they're often fronting a lot of these meetings. Well, this is a time when Catholicism was seen as a threat. It's dual loyalty. That Catholics can't be loyal to America because they're loyal to Rome. And then Irish Catholics are also loyal to Ireland. So they're trying, and then also the British are trying to suggest that this is a civil war between Protestants and Catholics in Ireland. So the Republicans were like, oh, you know what? All the priests on the, you don't want a bunch of priests on the altar when De Valera is speaking, or you don't want 9 or 10 priests on the platform, because then you're being identified. And so what the Irish Republicans do is they have Protestant supporters, big prominent Protestant supporters who do speaking tours, not necessarily in California where they're not needed, but up in places like Oregon, places like Eastern, like Idaho, to basically say, hey, we're like, this is not a Catholic thing. This is a national thing. And so they're very aware of that. But there's a tension there. And that's why you have someone like Father York, who's great, who's a big organizer, is effective, but he's wearing a collar, and he's expressing a certain kind of narrow type of Irish Catholicism that is limited in terms of its broader appeal, especially at this time in American history when when anti-Catholicism is visible.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask one other, indulge me. We tend to like the narrative that that Irish were powerful in San Francisco, but in fact, it was a divided city. Who were some of the people who wouldn't have liked seeing this in San Francisco?
Well, I kind of suggested them the group that are kind of really against a lot of this stuff on the West Coast are the American Legion, who you associate with good baseball and what have you, and American Legion, drinking cheap in American Legion bars. But the American Legion isn't just a war veterans group; it's very much seen as kind of as 100% Americanism, and that's their big thing. There isn't much of there's not really an English population out here, so that's not really an issue. There isn't really, the Anglo kind of WASP culture isn't that dominant here, but again, you're seeing it in Sacramento when you're getting some of a few different kind of chicanery. And as I mentioned, that episode where Mary McSweeney was supposed to address the California legislature, basically some of the representatives just pulled a parliamentary fast one and rescinded it. It caused huge hubbub in the legislature. But obviously some of the folks didn't want to do that. Down in LA, you see a kind of a more substantial, where the Irish are viewed kind of as a potential subversive threat, particularly by the LA Times. And again, you get demonstrations against Dev down there, but it's a little bit touch and go here in the Bay Area. It's just the Irish are more substantial in terms of their political and economic support. They also, because it's a Catholic town, I don't know what's San Francisco, maybe 70. I don't know if Jim knows. I think San Francisco might be 70 or 75% Catholic in by the 1920s. I don't have the census data, but when you think about the big populations, the Italians, the Latinos, there's the Catholic Church is big here, and a lot of that Catholic Church is Irish, and that also gives you disproportionate things. But there is pushback. But because the Irish Catholics are strong, and the Irish, and because not all of them are Catholic, the Irish-American community here in California, but the Irish community is strong enough that it pushes back pretty robustly. But you don't see that in certain states. They got to keep their heads down. I'll also just point out, in the state of Oregon in 1924 is going to have the highest concentration of Ku Klux Klan in the United States. They're going to be primarily anti-Catholic, as well as they hate everybody, but they really hate Catholics who are close by. And they're going to outlaw parochial school education in 1924. So that anti-Catholicism, it might not be as much of a problem here, but it's really visible in a lot of places. And I'd be really, whenever we talk about these mobilizations, I'm always curious, where isn't there an organization? Why isn't there stuff up in, I don't know, the foothills or what have you? And I'd like to learn more about that.
And you'd look at the foothills, for instance. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. First off, thank you for your presentation, Dr. Borgonovo. I would like the St. Vincent de Paul shout out. Drennan noticed the prominence of women speakers amongst the Republicans that would come to speak in the United States. And she was wondering if you had any explanation for that.
Well, Captain Pendergast of the San Francisco SFFD, another good Irish American community. I would say that, the one of the fascinating, Hannah Shee Skeffington, she comes in early. The organization isn't really that well planned. Mary McSweeney, who comes afterwards, she's really a big media sensation because of this hunger strike of her brother. But again, she's a lot more substantial than just the sister of Terrence McSweeney. She's this really robust, and she's an absolute knockout public speaker. But in terms of what Drennan might be interested in is that you get when Mary McSweeney comes, particularly a lot of the women's suffrage campaigners, especially those that are Catholic or Irish, are involved in organizing committees. And Mary McSweeney would typically have women's luncheons, and they would basically and they were especially drawn because she was a known suffrage campaigner in Ireland, although she was more of she wasn't as militant as Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, who was, as I said, did a couple jail terms. And so you see, but again, when we talk about kind of that first wave feminism, a lot of them aren't necessarily they're consider themselves patriotic. A lot of them aren't necessarily pro-Catholic. A lot of them definitely aren't for voting rights for African American women or Asian women or Chinese women or what have you. So that they have their own demographic. And again, I thought the fascinating thing was the civic group rescinding the invitation to Hannah Sheehy Skeffington. And I especially feel strongly because, Mike, as you remember, they became the League of Women Voters. As you remember, my mom was a past president of the San Francisco League of Women Voters. So it's really a dagger to the heart that they threw old Hannah Sheehy Skeffington under the bus at the Palace Hotel. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing that up, John.
Sorry, Mom.
Tony, in regards to your perceptive question there about opposing groups or whatever, as a note of quaint interest, we discovered that the International Orange Order, an international secret society, had been carrying on their U.S. national undercover meetings in Marin County for over 2 or 3 decades when we were having our speakers at the Irish Forum. So there are a lot of those sort of groups, but they're sub rosa.
Are they still in Marin? Are they still to be found in Marin in certain pockets?
I'll have to go and inquire again. They certainly were during the 80s and 90s, so that's not that far back. I'll check it out and let you know.
I wonder if they've had bonfires.
Hey, John, well, I think there was sort of a softer relationship between a lot of these organizations. Mayor Sonny Jim Rawl, for example, used to address fellow Masons and brother Knights of Columbus in the same speeches. And they all seem to be harmonious.
Well, you know that, Jim, you wrote about they gave a big presentation. Sonny Jim gave a big presentation to Dev when he came. But what I thought was funny was they had a big meeting before De Valera's arrival, and Sonny Jim was like, "We're not going to be outdone by the big cities of the East Coast. We're going to show that San Francisco can outdo any city in the East Coast." So it's like, so the reception was kind of, there's an element of civic pride in the whole thing, and that's also, it's one of the first stops De Valera makes. And it's because they know he's going to get this big, huge reception. And as you said, it's because even the non-Irish politicians are on board with this Irish constituency because it's a big element of their political support.
Yeah, this goes back a long way. Even in the 1850s with the Know-Nothings, they weren't quite hooked into what the philosophy was of these groups back east. See, they just took on the name. There was one candidate for mayor. He was from Germany, an immigrant, a Catholic German immigrant, running on the Know-Nothing Party for mayor of San Francisco. He was referred to as Herman the German. So I give up. You've got a hell of a lot of research yet to do.
I think we're reaching the magic hour. Anybody have a final question? If not, I'm going to turn the final comment over to a very important guest. Yes, please.
Okay, I wanted to suggest to Dr. Borgonovo to also, if he comes down to San Jose, besides going through Burns Collection, which has a lot on Los Angeles, by the way, and Oakland, as well as a bit on San Jose, talk to the McEnerys they've got quite a collection. And Tom McHenry is the former mayor. He wrote on his master's thesis, he wrote about McDonald, the 12 apostles. McDonald came here after he had a nervous breakdown, worked for his father, and was right here in downtown San Jose, is buried at the University of Santa Clara, not University, Mission Santa Clara University, the annex right on the city line. You can see his grave there anytime. Assuming nobody runs it down with a bulldozer,
You see her?
is the DAR, members of the DAR and SAR, Sons of the American Revolution, were often supportive of the organization. So were, interestingly enough, I found references to members of the Caledonian Club and the St. Andrew's Society, because the Scots, I've always felt that they had a raw deal from the English. And if they were Scots Irish Americans, they were three-quarters of Washington's forces. So Americans who remembered this heritage definitely were supportive. And it went to the Protestants. I will say one thing: you had more support from the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians than you ever did from the Baptists.
That is fascinating. Thank you.
I will definitely make a San Jose trip my next visit home. So that's my first priority.
So we'll close with that those good remarks. Thank you. I'm gonna leave the final comment to the very important person here, Mrs. Roberta Borgonovo. Mrs. Borgonovo, do you approve of John's performance today?
Yes, I do. Of course I do.
Without qualification.
He warned me he was going to take a swipe at the League of Women Voters, but they've definitely they're very liberal. They're fine. They're fine.
A little defensive there, Mom. That's okay. Anyway.
But I respect the research, and I know that that's part of John's mission, is to really have the facts and to back it up with real research. So yes, I'm pleased. Thank you, John.
And I always travel anywhere to any conferences with my mother, because people are not going to give you hostile questions if they know your mother is in the audience. So it's always
perfect.
It's like a human shield. So thanks, Mom.
Right.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I see David Brundage there. Thank you for coming today, David.
That's great talk, John.
Thanks, David. I gave you a shout out at the beginning.
Yes, sir. All right, this was wonderful. Thank you, John. First and foremost, thank you, John, for a fantastic presentation. And we look forward to hearing much more from you about this research. As Jim said, it does seem that you've got a lot of work ahead of you on this really fascinating these fascinating topics. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. It was a wonderful gathering. And we hope to see as many of you as can attend in person at the United Irish Cultural Center Sunday, February 25th, when our very own Rebecca Tracy will be talking about Irish travelers. So thank you all very kindly. Thank you, John, very much for a wonderful talk.
Thanks, Tony. Go Niners. Bye-bye.
Go Niners.
Go Niners.
All right. See you all soon. Thank you.